Hello and welcome to Varn Blog. And today we're here with Conan Neutron of Conan and the Secret Friends and the Protonic Reversal podcast and regular guest over there at Movie Night Extravaganza. Quite like me, we're there a lot. It's actually kind of how I know you through
It
both
is.
Forrest and through our mutual musician friend Jason Miles. So
Who has been a live member of Conan Neutron, the Secret Friends, many a time, as he's usually the first one to bring that up, which I appreciate because it sounds better coming from him. Otherwise, at this point, it sounds like I'm trying to jump onto his stolen valor, right?
yeah.
But it's true, and he's a hell of a musician, so why shouldn't he? Yeah. And feature guest or co-host, depending on what show it appears for Movie Night Extravaganza, like who knows? But yeah, all those things are true.
So I've been listening to some of your music lately, and I've listened to a fair amount of your show. It's interesting how little play music actually gets on podcast, which is a philosophical discussion I think we might have, because you would think, given that it's an audio format, that it would be natural. But I'm going to go and, do my normal blame capitalism, which I like to do regularly, or here blame explicitly digital rights and artists not even
DMCA.
Right. And artists often not even have the rights to their music. It did seem to kill the possibility of the music podcast pretty dead. Very early on. But I've been listening to your show because I've been trying to get a feel for where music is right now off the mainstream radar. I had a long conversation with Karthik and Marcus over from Revolutionary Tracks on Left Flank, where we were trying to position everything. And it's very hard to get a feel for how musicians are surviving if they're not major label artists after COVID. When I say post-COVID, guys, I don't mean COVID's over. It's a disease like the flu. It is now always with us, unless we're very lucky. I mean post-COVID happening. So how have you've sat down with a lot of musicians, a lot of independent musicians. How have they been surviving in the last year?
Sure. So this is, you're pretty much throwing me a Conan Neutron catnip right now. Like this is sort of like the raison d'etre of the show. Also, as you mentioned at the beginning, I've made records and toured for the vast part of over 20 years now. And I often call touring ostensibly being a traveling Etsy store, because you're carrying so much crap around with you that you have there's the t-shirts and there's the hoodies and there's the records and the CDs and so on and so on. And it's just as much as selling the tchotchkes as anything else. But all that's changed in COVID. And it's funny because you mentioned Karthik and Marcus, because I got into an informal conversation. It wasn't on the air with them about just how vital the first Bandcamp First Fridays have been over the past year. And for folks that aren't familiar, Bandcamp is maybe the most artist-friendly music service that is out there. Actually, maybe nothing. It definitely is. And what they do is they usually take a chunk of the either digital sales or merch sales or whatever, small chunk, fair enough, right? But what they started doing during the COVID is they started waiving that. And so everything goes directly to the artist. But also what they did is they built immediacy of this is the day where we buy new music. This is the day that we get together and you go with your friends hey, what'd you pick up? Oh, I got the Tar live album and I got the Tropical Fuckstorm record and so on and so on. And the idea of it being a social event around purchase of music in a stream-based society, turn that into a revenue model that, again, it's not all about capitalism, right? But as far as keeping the doors open and paying your power bill and whatnot,
you gotta eat.
For musicians just as myself, I worked it out. Actually, speaking of Forrest, I was talking to him sort of informally the other day, and I just worked out. I was like, oh yeah, what do we have? About 60,000 plays on Spotify. Let's work out exactly how much money that is. And I worked out that it was about I think $500 or something along those lines for 5 years. And a good Bandcamp Friday is like more of that for someone like me. And again, I'm in a privileged position where I'm not any of those, we call them like musician upper class artists that like live as being a musician all the time, but I'm not nobody either. It's kind of like sort of in between, kind of this weird in between space. But like those Bandcamp Fridays have incentivized people, even if they're like, on lockdown, to care about buying music, and in a way of to actually actively make supporting music an event, as opposed to something like Spotify, where the music making is just to get people in the door for their thing. Like they're looking at as content creation. If you look at any of the artist imagery for Spotify, they have these classes are basically like how to do things the way we want you to do, which is like, are you kidding me? Like, I know how to do this, but you've put yourself in the middle. Like companies like Spotify are now the new gatekeepers, whereas before, I just had Joe Carducci on from who found not only helped found SST, but like the whole American independent distribution model was basically him and a couple other people, which is crazy to think about. There was just a couple of people like, hey, we should make a thing where people can get the records over here, especially for like the younger listeners that would be like, what? Well, of course, everything's going to be instantly available at 2 clicks, but that didn't really used to be the case. So to have someone like that talk about musical gatekeepers like Jan Winter from Rolling Stone, that he hated Black Flag, hated them, didn't want them covered in the magazine. That made him the gatekeeper for that. Well, now the gatekeeper are these ostensibly distribution networks that aren't distribution networks. They're algorithmically placed profit models that are make musicians into sharecroppers, ostensibly. So one of the things
very small, tiny shares of very, very small rents.
Exactly. And that's even, and so it's different problems for different folks, right? If I have like a Jerry Casale from Devo on, he's going to have different problems than a Greg Picciotto from Dillinger Escape Plan is going to have different problems than like a gem from the band Dead. It's all different gradations of models. But the point of fact right now is that it's never been easier for musicians to get their music out, and never been harder to either reach people and or even like break even, let alone like make money. So if you're a band that like manages to make money, like congratulations, you've done what's almost impossible. And it's mostly legacy acts, and not just legacy acts like an Adele or something along those lines, but look at like a Dinosaur Jr. or something along those lines that worked for years as a known commodity, continues to do it, continues to put out good stuff. Good on them, but not everyone's Jay Mascis, right? I mean, not everyone has that goodwill built up over like decades that like, yeah, man, I'll go see Dinosaur. Hell yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. Jody Dean once talked, and this was years and years ago, about how Pareto distributions actually really affect like the rent-seeking models of content generating companies like Facebook or whatever. And this was really before Spotify was even in the US. But what you notice is that if you're not backed by these old labels who are dinosaurs and dying, yes, but they built up a lot of people's reputations and got them into the market. If you're not backed up by that now, you're either very lucky as a SoundCloud or a Bandcamp artist, or you entered the field early. And I find it interesting because it is something where there's not usually a whole lot of comparisons between the poetry market, which I know very well because I work in it, and poetry market should be in quotation marks.
Market, air quotes implied. Yes,
right.
Just like I have a music career, air quotes implied.
Right. I mean, there's a reason why most people's first books are like charity awards. But it's been fascinating to see the overlap and how those two fields make money. Because if you're not a professor of poetry, basically, if you're not an MFA with a tenure track gig, and let's face it, that's been overproduced for 2 decades. So there's like something like 300 people for every one job.
Exactly. Yeah.
you make your money as a side gig at readings hawking your merch, because usually
Yes.
you can get a decent deal with your book distributor to let you distribute it directly at the gig, pocket the money. What I always, and I was telling Karthik this recently, like what I would do is I would just say convert my royalties, which were like never more than
into product
into
itself.
product,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Send me the product.
We do the same thing because we and that's one of the things that's so effed up about like recently is like we put out a record we have not been able to tour on at all, and it's not like it's like you're making money hand over fist, but you make enough to not only keep the lights on, but plus if you put the effort into it. And right now it's vinyl. I don't know, maybe it's going to be cassette tapes next. I mean, the whole like supply chain thing for vinyl and how all the major labels are now getting in on it, and so now like it's like a year out to be able to like press vinyl. Who even knows how sustainable that is? I frankly don't give a damn. It's more just about like how do people want to get this? How do people want the music to, and whether they're like getting it like as a Pokemon thing, like put it up on their wall because the artwork's cool, or whether they're playing it every day on their turntable. Frankly, it doesn't matter to me because once it leaves our hands, it's theirs to have. I'm just glad for the engagement, and that's why we have the other things as well. But you hit on something really important that we actually talked about Joe Carducci recently about that being, you know, you have to find ways to get it in the hands of the people, but also you got to keep the ship afloat, right? And so there's a lot of parallels to that. And just real quick, I also want to say that the major labels, much in the same way that people are like, well, I don't watch cable news. Yes, but you know, cable news does have influence, correct? Oh, yeah, I guess so. Maybe. No one I know. Yeah, but you know what? Like, literally, like, they put the thumb on the scale on every election, and it still has influence, whether you like it or whether you think it's cool or not. In that same way, major labels, sure, their influence has waned. Sure, you can just put something up on YouTube and be heard by someone in like Bangalore or like Australia tomorrow. Absolutely. But the thing is, everybody has the ability to do it. So now everybody is doing it. So that's interesting. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that like there's different sort of filters. So people that already have come in, you know, people that have been MSNBC anchors, they're going to have like a certain constituency of people that will listen to them and hang on every word, much in the same way that if you were on a major label and you got in like, you know, during like, you know, say the 90s gold rush or like whatever, or you're, was it a Royals Lord or something? We just happened to like, what were the rules that week? Well, I don't know, but she got in. And that song is great. Don't get me wrong, but it's like she managed to like get in and like build a career off it. Fantastic. But that's a moonshot. And I think it's like that with any niche market. I mean, I know lots of like visual artists that are in the same sort of boat. But the whole idea of like don't even bother paying me. Just give me more records, because the idea is like we're selling these records. You know, you're always kind of like freaking one step ahead of the spider, you know, whistling past the graveyard for sure, especially on tour where you're like, and then we can talk about, you know, OPEC and gas prices and all that if you want, but where it's literally like, okay, hopefully we're going to make enough to like get to the next show, you know, like, okay, are we crashing on someone's floor in someone's basement tonight? Or are we going to like pop for a crappy Motel 6? Like, these are the real things. And so what I love, and apologies, this is a derivation that kind of turned into a soliloquy, but what I love talking to folks that like come from different eras of the American DIY world is really kind of seeing the how little that's changed, but like hearing like, you know, what they've done to like make it not just sustainable as a business model, but sustainable and interesting for the art. Like what has helped them drive that forward, what was an impediment, what in some cases killed their love for it and they stopped doing it. I find that fascinating. It's about why they do what they do. And sometimes I ask myself that same question. I'm in a documentary about touring called Why Am I Doing This? Which is the perfect title, because you ask yourself that all the time. Why am I doing this? And I came up looking at like the cockeyed optimist in this, because I actually have like positive answers to it, right? But like it is pretty telling that like Eric just threw that up on YouTube, and it's got, you know, it's already got something like it's over 100,000 views. I can't remember like what it, but this is like a full length feature documentary. Like he could have like tried to shop out to Netflix or whatever the thing, but he was like, yeah, I'm just gonna put it up. It's the spirit of the thing. It's the spirit of DIY. Anyway, that kind of answers to your point a little bit.
Yeah, there's a whole lot here, though. I think one of the things is someone's mentioning in the chat that payola is real, and it with YouTube that's kind of a crazy proposition because it is real. I know because I've had people approach me to sell me views, like to increase my viewer rate, to do compounding views, and I'm always
so sad. I like. It's such a bummer that like there's a market for that of like, hey, you want to appear popular? I can sell you like, and then think about a farm of like phones or computers or whatever somewhere that are all just like silently watching your show.
With no one on the other end in like India or Russia. Yeah. I mean,
explain that to a founding father, you know, like what?
Right. But what's interesting about this, you know, I'm going to go on my little tirade because this is, believe it or not, it's the arts industry that made me understand Marxist economics because the only thing that's profitable in our labor in the arts that isn't captured by rent seekers somewhere are the physical commodities we produce. Yeah. And one of the most disastrous things for the music industry in the long run was removing the physical commodity in electronics. Now, that's great for consumers. It's terrible for musicians. And how it's been adjusted to has been niche products that cannot be digitized in the same day. Literally, I mean, that's why we have a vinyl fetish. You can't digitize
exactly it. Because it became about the device. It became, oh, do you have the new phone or whatever? Right. Where like, you know, if you go back like 15 years, be like, what? But they were always trying to gear towards that. It's just that the technology wasn't there to be able to get that kind of capitalistic wanting urge of like your life will be complete if you get the new whatever the hell it is. And again, speaking very briefly to what was your actual point on the earlier thing, you know, why are there more shows that play actual music? Well, it's all DMCA, right? YouTube is so aggressive about its takedowns. Like I'm lucky that Protonic Reversal is, I'm not going to say not profit, but it's, I say it's like no ads, no sponsors, no kidding. It's Patreon only. If you want, and here's another reason why I'm coming from like the Minutemen school, right? If you want, and I mean the band, not the social movement, of course. If you want episodes of the show sooner, costs you $1 a month. Enough people want it that like it brings in decent enough amount of revenue. Some people are just doing it to support the show, but I would rather have like 1,000 people playing $1 a month than like be like, oh, here's at the $300 level, you get me, you know, tap dancing happy birthday to you. Like I'm just not gonna do that. That's not what the show is. But it's important for me to have what is ostensibly a show about the nature of art, specifically like with music and a certain type of musician and artist, be free of commercial enterprise. Like some people look at that, and I had there was a special I did called The Culture of Like and Subscribe with Steve Albini, where we talked about this. But the idea is like the people look at like, oh, monetization and like, oh, I've got a sponsor now, I'm official, as like that's the only way to go. And that's like how like they're like, I'm old enough to remember when there was like selling out. Oh, so and so sold out. Their music is in like a, you know, like a Bronco commercial or whatever. Whereas now, like, I know plenty of younger musicians. That idea is just a foreign concept. Selling out, like, what do you mean? Like, of course you want to be on an Apple commercial. Why wouldn't you be? Like this, the idea of there even being like, and it's not even like, it's not like I was like, you know, explicitly I mean, I'm not crass, you know, I'm not like explicitly anti like capitalist in that specific way. But the idea of just being like, oh, that's distasteful that you would associate yourself with that. Now it's just like, that's an outmoded concept entirely. So that comes down to the idea of like the culture of like and subscribe, right? Like and subscribe, like that gets our numbers up. That allows us to get bigger sponsors, so on and so on. Protonic, I just eschew that entirely. And that's my choice. I don't expect it to work for anyone else. I'm not saying that I hate money. You know, I mean, well, clearly I do. All my endeavors make almost none of it. But like, it's fascinating to me that so many people look at, and I'm not going to say who, but they look at some of the people of the genre, whether it's podcasting, streaming, whatever, and they see them go through these like capitalistic models, and they think, oh, that's the way that you do this. No, it really isn't. Like, there's other ways to do this. Also, again, I think I'll go back. Just last thing, like we'll talk about our. I got some new equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And I never cared about like having a nice mic until I had a nice mic, and then I was like, okay, that actually does sound quite a bit better. But people get hung up on like the mechanics of it rather than what they're putting out there. I'm sure, like with you probably know some people that are like some of the most incredible poets you've ever heard, but no one's gonna hear them because they're like, whatever. Maybe they have like some.
Well, I mean, poetry is unfortunately a rich person's affectation art,
Yeah.
where a lot of people are proud they don't make money and aren't known.
It's a point of pride. Yeah, it's a badge of courage somehow that like it's like like, oh, we get it. Yeah, cool. It doesn't make it good. It can be good and successful and good and not successful, but by law of averages, it's probably going to be good and unsuccessful, much like with music.
Well, I mean, it's interesting in a lot of ways. One thing I think about him and podcasting world in a similar vein to you, I podcasted for 10 years.
Yeah.
I got a mid-tier streaming mic a year ago.
Right, exactly. I'd have it bought for me as a gift. It was like, Conan, we're getting this for you because you deserve to have this and you will never get it for yourself. I'm like, I don't know about the first part, but you're definitely true about the second part. I will never get that for myself. And there's something to be said for like, I'm sure if you have rich parents or something, like, like whatever, you can get like all like the top-notch podcasting gear in the world. If you put out crap, nobody's going to care. So it's not that there's a meritocracy, because there really isn't. The idea of a meritocracy always was dubious and specious in concept, but in the days of there being just constant total information, forced awareness, and a fire hose coming at you all the time, it's absurd. You're going to miss stuff all the time. I search things out. I miss stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, my bad. Just should have paid attention to that, didn't, or like it, whatever. Maybe I had something else going on. And that is the model that has been chosen for us and that we have not protested. Much in the same way that we should have been stronger advocates against the algorithm, and now we just sort of rolled over and took it. Much in the same way that we should have been paying more attention about the Patriot Act, and we didn't do that either. Because once those freedoms are given away, they ain't coming back.
Well, I mean, it's funny because all these things are definitively tied in my mind. I had a liberal friend lecturing me about how the end of privacy was a good thing the other day, and I'm not gonna say what I said to them because it was choice and highly offensive. But
that's not way you can use it again. We'll be like, oh, he's doing the thing. Like I used Shining City of Failure for something recently, and I was like, oh, but that was on the show, so I got to make sure I don't keep saying that, or people are gonna think I repeat myself. But I feel pretty good about that. But anyway, yeah. So this liberal decided that
that in the privacy is good. We don't need it, and I'm like. Okay, I might even buy total transparency as a social good, actually, if you really A, meant it. But B, people are monetizing our lack of privacy.
Exactly.
And the government's involvement in it is not been shown to make anyone safer.
No. So it's toothless attempted regulation by people that don't actually understand what the problem is. And that's what's so maddening, and that's when it gets into the idea of like leadership having like a generational change aspect of things. It's like, yeah, not that it would solve everything, but if you have someone that you don't have to describe what like Instagram is to, like, and they have like their printed out notes in front of them, then you're probably going to be in a good position to understand like why it's a problem that like young girls are being showed these incredibly unrealistic body image things and being bullied on this incredibly popular platform that was ostensibly for a long time one of the better ones to be on, because you couldn't have your right-wing high school friends like long screeds about how the government's going to come for them and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. It was just like, hey, here's my cool pet. Here's like a funny sign I saw.
Yeah, I was about to say, I used to go to Instagram to feel good about social media about like until about a year ago.
Yeah, that's been ruined too. But I mean, whatever.
It's similar with TikTok, where TikTok moved from fun people doing stupid dances to like 13-second conspiracy theories and
yeah, exactly.
It's just and it's interesting though, because I do have to like somewhat tell people in regards to the algorithm, we I don't want to say that it's your fault that you get shitty stuff because Facebook manipulates it. It's a manipulated app. They have admitted to manipulating people's emotions and stuff through algorithmic changes.
Well, you're the
But
product. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Bingo.
Period.
And you also really have to be careful what you input in it. Like for years, I got into that dopamine addiction of negative feedback loops with Facebook, and it rewarded it with things that would set me off constantly.
Yeah, check out what this idiot's up to, and then you're
Right.
like, oh, you suck. What's wrong?
I quit using it for 6 months, and I come back, and it's mostly anodyne ass ads.
Right.
which it just makes it uninteresting. But it was kind of a social experiment where I was like, oh. And furthermore, I like to talk about this with Twitter. Like, why do all musicians, porn stars, streamers, why do we all use Twitter since it's the lowest used form of social media? And that's because this algorithm is the least invasive and the most organic, in quotation marks. It has an algorithm. It does play a little bit of shenanigans with it, but there's not nearly as much pay-to-play element to it as there are to all the other.
And if you use Twitter lists, you can actually see the things you want to see, which the idea that would be like, that would be a bold concept. Hey, I get to see the things that I want to see, but like, you have no guarantee of that. Like I know people that try to use Facebook as like an archival form. It's like, why would you use something that is forcing purposeful ephemerality and permanent present tense as an archival format for literally anything? Because what you're talking about is the opposite of what it's going to do. And what's going to do is going to freaking disappear. And like, I don't know why you would ever do that. Why would you think that would be a good thing to do? I don't trust any of this crap. So, dude, I again, earlier non on stream conversation I had with Marcus and Karthik. It's like, look, I've been doing this long enough. By this, I mean making music. That I remember there was a time that nobody can envision a world without MySpace.
Yeah.
And you got people now being like, "What's MySpace?" But
I remember when I thought social media was LiveJournal, like
LiveJournal OG right here, man. And like, I hope no one ever. Is it still up? I hope it's not. I hope no one ever.
One of mine is. Most of mine are not, and thank God for it.
Make a note to check that when I get off.
But my point about this though is, on one hand, there's these super big brands that have become massive information brokers in our society that it is hard to imagine how you're going to take care of Zuckerberg. On the other hand,
you like take care of him.
On the other hand,
Sopranos reference, by the way. Satire.
On the other hand, there is a real sense that most of the things that are not these major 3 brands are ephemeral, and yet we use them. It amazes me how much my media life depends on things like Twitter. Because when people tell me quit Twitter, I'm always like, and destroy my brand.
Right, exactly. Right. Why don't I just go write a manifesto in the woods? Because I'll be doing the same thing if I get off of that. So if I may, much like yourself, I've been podcasting for a very long time. Even before Protonic Reversal, I had a previous podcast before that. So the show's been around going on 8 years, but I've been podcasting for about 10, which for me is like that makes you like the elder god of podcasting, right?
Yeah, you and I are OGs.
Exactly.
Right.
But that said, I can tell you the exact moment, and it happened during COVID. The growth of Protonic Reversal during COVID has been astounding. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of people found value in hearing these conversations in like uncertain times, staring down the barrel of a gun financially. You've got this existential dread that is involved with being a person in this world in these days, all the stuff going on. So to hear these conversations that at times, would also involve like, hey, how does so-and-so feel about that? Oh, okay. Well, we're going to talk about that also, but we're also going to get into the whys and wherefores. I've done basically the same show for the entire time. It's gradually gotten better. Don't get me wrong. You always want to be getting better, not worse. But there was something about COVID, and when COVID hit, that had it found a new audience like tenfold, which is great. And it's fantastic. I don't take that for granted. I'm so glad. I'm glad people go back in the archives and find the old episodes. I've had some incredible people on. That's opened doors for other people. But the point of fact is, I was doing it for a long time. And in the same way that most of us that are creative are, that I was over here doing my thing. And there's all this other stuff happening, but I'm over here doing my thing. And, occasionally you like reach a person or two. And then that changed. So for me, I know what it's like to be on the other end of the Zuck machine when you don't have the social capital to be something that's important, and how it is to at least be on the low medium end of when you are important. And you do get treated differently. I can put it this way. A friend of mine, this guy, Jason Myers, not Miles, because I have a Jason Myers and a Jason Miles in my life. Jason Miles, of course, Jason Miles, This is Revolution, obviously, and sometimes plays the Secret Friends in a live scenario. But Jason Myers is an author on Simon and Schuster, and he talked about like depositing the check for his first book, and basically how everyone at the bank suddenly treats you completely differently. Like you get like the you get like the cheat codes to be treated like somebody that actually means something instead of some piece of crap that's like causing them a problem by having to talk to you. And again, and it's not like Protonic Reversal is like whatever, it does pretty well for the niche that it's in, and I stand by all of it. But most of that growth has been the last year and a half, and I've been, for the vast majority of it, I've been in the same spot that most people are that have shows. So I liken it to this. When a band has a break of some kind, when you have a band, okay, so an extreme example would be like Idols, who have been slogging it out for like a long time. And then like, I think if I remember right, they went on tour with Foo Fighters. And then like, because they had sort of found their creative nadir and they were really hitting hard at what they do, they managed to connect with this larger audience because they were in their moment of time and able to parlay that into something better. But they also were a band before that, and they know what it's like to be like, hey, we just drove, well, it's England, so we'll say 2 hours, and that's half the country. 2 hours to go play for you, and there's like 5 people here. So I think when you know that, and when you've been on both sides of it, you have a sort of inherent skepticism for how these platforms operate, which people seem to think they get this idea that it's some conspiracy against them. No, it's not a conspiracy against you. Again, it's all like ones and zeros. It's just the numbers. It's the numbers of this person matters, this person doesn't, and that can change tomorrow. Now, this is sort of like there's a couple Black Mirror episodes about this, that are sort of I like that show. It's sort of like I think it takes what the Twilight Zone does and puts it in a modern construct in a way that's very deeply entertaining. And in the same way, like Twilight Zone, some of the episodes are terrible, some of them are great, and some of them are just there. But there's a couple episodes that kind of get into that about being like, okay, so what about if you apply that social capital concern towards like living your life? Like that's horrifying, but that's what we're going for, because this is basically a freight train of like, again, we've acceded to the algorithm, to like machine learning now determines what we are allowed to see, what we're allowed to listen to, what we're told is good. Harkening back to your earlier point, we call that a callback, that, what happened to like a podcast that was like, hey, here's all the, the most killer songs for 2020. Here's all my favorite ones from it. Well, here comes the DMCA to be like, take that shit down. Take it down. Our copyright holder says ... My favorite DMCA takedown, by the way, ever, was for the theme song to Protonic Reversal, which is a Conan Neutron, the Secret Friends song. Solely written, published, not performed, but like I own all the rights to everything. And put out on Seismic Wave Entertainment, which is my label, where I have 100% control of everything. So I took great joy in putting the you get to do I don't agree with this decision. Like, I can't think of the word right now, but like, I don't agree with this decision. Sort of like type the thing. It was like, dear sirs, ... That was a great one to type because that's what the system is. And the fact that, and the reason why is because, and I looked into it, our distributor was like, oh, we don't have the time to be able to give you the ability to do yes or no for these. I'm like, that is horrifying because I'm someone that like, I license my stuff on Creative Commons, meaning that as long as you're not making money off of us, I don't care. Do whatever you want. Like, do whatever you want with it. Like, it's fine. So the idea that people would be like, for these micro pennies, right? Micro pennies of potential profit would be like making someone just, it's hard enough having a show in general, let alone having something worthwhile that like, you know what, man, I'm just not going to play music because if I play music, I'm going to get a takedown and I don't even want to deal with it. Like then like half the time everything is obfuscated and like misunderstood because they always are erring on the side of somebody pulling a grift. And a lot of that comes from like somebody decided some years back, hey, if a taxi is driving by in a movie scene and you hear like a part of like, you know, feel like making love, then okay, yeah, you have to pay us for that. Which is the absurd in the copyright where it's like, really? Like, okay, for those 3 seconds or whatever it is that was on there. And that's why they've kind of super aggressive, like takedown first, which I might add completely depends on who you are. It completely depends on who you are, how those takedowns, and whether you can get a human being to like work the case for it. So to answer the earlier question of like what happened to like the era of like the digital mixtape, things like that. Well, it's still there, but you got to do it on Spotify or like Apple Music or any of the other walled gardens that keep all the artists sharecropping away as they pay them some infinitesimal, micro pennies of what it actually is. Now, if you look at it like radio, like it's like the equivalent of modern equivalent of radio, that's fine. But the thing is, we've also trained people, and people have been trained that, oh, you don't need to own a music library because you can ostensibly rent a music library. That's not how they put it, but that's what the modus operandi is. That you don't own this music. You have a subscription to Spotify and whatever's in the Spotify library or whatever it is. You know, it's not just Spotify. I'm harping on them because of the 800-pound gorilla, right? But something changed significantly in music when people acceded to like, okay, cool, we do things this way now. And it wasn't like people had like a tick this box if you want to rent your music for forever. Tick this box if you'd like to maintain your own music libraries, which I still do, by the way, but I'm a wild anomaly. Like, obviously, I'm a wild anomaly in a lot of ways. That culture changed when that became an option. And it went unsung. It went unheralded. It went unnoticed, except for things like, if you like niche EFF, mention something about it, and it was sort of like, oh, those guys.
I mean, well, it's interesting because I have a lot of physical media that you can't actually get even now on streaming. But I have noticed in my own collections of things, I went about 10 years ago, no, about 15 years ago, I digitized most of my CDs. And then I lost a hard drive and redigitized them.
Right.
And then...
Only true heads know, by the way.
Right. and then I think I think it was about 7 years ago, I pretty much gave up on listening to... I noticed that I still have my physical media collection.
Yeah.
I still have my digitized form of it. But you're right. I didn't even notice when I quit listening to it. It happened slowly over a period of 2 to 3 years. Similar to when I quit downloading podcasts, frankly.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which I still do. But yeah, I get that. Like, I'm an outlier there too.
But there's stuff, for example, that I know I have that I can't find anywhere. A lot of it's over digital rights issues. A lot of it's over because it's really small bands that don't still exist to get on these platforms. I think of a band called Juno that was on a label, DeSoto Records. It used to be run by
Juno. They did that split dismemberment plan.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can't find them anymore. They
really?
are not
Okay,
on a streaming service anywhere. When you look them up, it lists them, and then it gives you the music of a different rapper. Um,
Who probably just typed in Spotify. Yeah, that name's free. Okay, cool.
right, right. So it's fascinating because both bios come up, but it's
right.
interesting. There's like DeSoto music, except for Burning Airlines, is largely in Shiner. There's two of their major bands. I guess with Dismemberment Plan too, but there's 2 or 3 of those bands that were not in those big 3 of this really small DC music label that have just been nearly erased because they're not on the streamer.
Redacted. Yeah, and so it's funny you mentioned that too, because I've not only had I've had Jay Robbins on a few times. I had Bill Barbaro on also from Jawbox. But I mean, I'm, we've played with Shiner a bunch. Like Josh especially is like a good friend of mine, as is Alan. And it's just wild that Shiner is someone who's their legend has only grown since and actually they put out a record last year. It's one of my favorite records of last year. I
actually noticed a whole lot of bands that I hadn't heard from in 18 years put out a record last year.
They put out a record, which wow, who expected that? That's crazy. And that's a thing, and that's
Quicksand put out a record. There's a bunch of people.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. But for whatever reason, and Shiner's a band that when even pre the Egg, when Replicator, my old band, was touring around, I was like, oh, you play with Shiner. Shiner's so good. Oh, okay, cool. And it took me years to check them out. By the time I actually finally checked them out, they were long gone at that point before they got back together again. And I was like, oh wow, this is great. This is awesome. But why did Shiner get that treatment as opposed to it's funny because we've mentioned Dismemberment Plan 3 times. And I feel like that's a band that that band was huge in the 2000s, and nobody talks about the Dismemberment Plan right now. And by the way, Emergency and I, that's a fantastic record.
Emergency and I and Change are both amazing records.
Yeah, and Change, actually, I was not stoked on Change when it came out, and I was like, hey, this actually aged pretty well. And it's Les Savvy Favs in the same sort of way. It's that was the most unfuckwithable live band, period. They were going. They could play with anyone. It didn't matter who they were playing with. And Les Savvy Fav was the best band, because they just were astounding. But their records are good too. Yet, are kids getting into Les Savvy Fav? I don't know. I hope so. I had Sid on, which was freaking awesome because he's in the HE band on the one late night show, and that's fascinating to me. It's okay, you got Marnie Stern, you got Fred Armisen ostensibly band leading. It's sort of that era of indie rock stars retirement program to be on this talk show, and it's really cool and interesting. And they have different drummers.
I was thinking about that the other day, though, about that particular period in indie rock's time. It's kind of a weird, because a lot of it has either fallen off in popularity, or that you can still find it, or like I mentioned with Juno, has just disappeared.
Literally disappeared. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting because I think that was a time period where radio rock and indie rock was super divergent in a way that it really hadn't been during the 90s, and it wasn't later on. But Danny Besner was talking about he said something snarky about how 99 to 2004 was objectively the worst years for music. And I kind of agreed.
I'm gonna have words with him.
Yeah, I kind of agreed with him when it came to pop rock and pop. I think between the end of new metal, and the end of the boy bands and all that stuff running out of steam. But then I went back through and think about all these amazing indie bands that were touring in that time period,
right?
That people don't have the nostalgia for. It's just not. It's not the nostalgia has not been built the way. For example, I'm from Georgia. I live down the street from Athens, so Elephant Six music is sort of the story of my childhood.
Of course,
and I was in the zine cultures in the early to mid 90s when I was a kid. So Jeff Magnum and all that stuff was major to me, although it was also interesting because it was one of those things where almost infamously now, by the time it caught on to the rest of the country,
You were sick of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was sick of it. And also Jeff was obscurely couch surfing. And it turned in, and like had literally fallen off the radar while his band became like
huge
huge
with the new audience, the new generation. And like there's been like the backlash against Neutral Milk Tail, and then like the backlash against the backlash, so on and so on.
I think we lived through like 2 or 3. I mean, part of this, there's only 2 albums, so
yeah, well, exactly. There's a smaller body of work, and honestly, the thing that got me was like Bright Eyes, because the Bright Eyes being like, I mean, I remember when it was like In Sound was like, oh, Bright Eyes, and yeah, it's fine. It was okay. I wasn't exactly the target audience. It was fine, but it's like when I was like, oh, people are still into Bright Eyes, like really? That like that, you know, and they're not 12. Okay, you know. but like, yeah, you're talking about the era like before Modest Mouse was played in like football stadiums, right? Like this is like there was still a thriving DIY movement, but it's like the iPod era.
Right, it's the beginning of the iPod era, but ironically that kills a lot of these, not the bands, but a lot of these minor labels. Because one thing I was talking to Karthik and Marcus about is the minor label as a truly independent phenomenon is damn near dead. It still exists, but there's not like it was one of the first things to get hollowed out. One, because when these big failing labels started looking for basically new IP, they started buying up the back catalogs of these indie labels and just buying them out. I mean, Matador being probably the most famous. Matador and Sub Pop both. Yeah, but then what you see is a lot of this stuff just kind of falls into ultra obscurity, even by musicians like, you know, we're mentioning, you know, if we're talking about the Soto records, we're really talking about like basically 6 bands that were friends with Jay Robbins.
Yeah, but exactly the Jay Robbins expanded universe, and I say that he's a friend, you know, but like, yeah.
You know, and I love Jay Robbins. I mean, I really do love Jay Robbins, but
all love. Have you heard the solo record that came out last year?
It's great.
Oh, so good. So I've had him on like 3 times, and I haven't had him on since then, and I really should probably get on that. But anyway, continue.
But you see this trend of these consolidations. You also saw the end of a lot of these scenes around the editor, the end of the iPod. So like there's still regional music. Like we can talk about like the Savannah metal scene, but it's a lot less, or you know, or Atlanta trap house or whatever. But it's
more niche thing. It's more of a niche thing. And so that's why it's interesting to me to have someone like Chris Murphy from Sloan on, who's like, you know, and that's astounding just because we could have a whole podcast about their whole founded in fairness, equal shares for everyone, equal songs on each record. Like, I mean, talk about communitarian efforts. I mean, holy shit. But like, also they're still a band, right? All their contemporaries, like they gave it up long ago, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But to see someone that's like been through all of these eras, like literally started during like the indie rock gold rush, and like weathered each of these storms, like the iPod era into like the streaming era, into like whatever the Sam Hill we're in now, like that's fascinating to me, and that's fascinating for a lot of the listeners as well, because of course, as you might imagine, for Protonic, get a few people that actually are creative and play music. Hard to believe, I know, that listen to the show. And that's can be something where that's unifying to hear how do you survive? How do you like make it work for you? And that's a band that also, like, let's also remember Canada has certain regulations that require you to play a certain amount of Canadian artists per hour. And for the longest time, that led to things like, you know, bands like Eric's Trip being like, you know, like maybe a little bigger than they would have been warranted if they were just in some indie band, and things along those lines. But then like a band like Nickelback comes out, and then suddenly like, you know, everyone's like, oh, we can just play Nickelback, and that satisfies the criteria, which is just like, oh,
right,
this is the only earth that I can live on. But yeah, I mean, but even then, you know, this corporate melange, manufactured rage BS gets to make its way into the system because we've ceded control to people that ultimately are going to try to find the most tame and manageable thing. Like when I talk to a lot of people from, you know, ostensibly like the 90s music world or whatever, it's just how clear, just like it was to me as a kid listening to this stuff, that the authentic stuff, like, your Sonic Youths, your Nirvana, your Mudhoneys, your Butthole Surfers, your Melvins,
Your
so on
grunge
and
and New
so on.
York noise scene, right? Like,
Yeah, all that stuff versus like something like Stone Temple Pilots or like Candlebox, fuck,
oh
a
man,
Silverchair,
you
which
and
is
I
like,
are in a similar generation that you can mention Candlebox and I know what you're talking about.
right,
But
exactly.
like,
Madonna, that was like, Madonna was all about Candlebox and pushed
oh my
Candlebox,
god,
and it had all of like the trapping. It had some of the trappings of like Nirvana and like Pearl Jam, but it's just like, wow, this is the worst thing that I have ever heard. And like, every once in a while, I'll see like somebody. It's terrible. That's like, because by nature of the fact I still tour and make records and play music and so on and so on, I feel like my friend base continues to get younger while I continue to get older. It's kind of weird, but like, I'll see people
it
try to
happens as a
like,
leftist too. Just heads up.
yeah, I was gonna say, I know it's not unique to music, yeah. But I see people sort of trying to like, hey, can we do a critical assessment of, I don't want to be mean, I'm not gonna mention the names of like whatever, like, like some band. I'm like,
Ugly Kid Joe.
no. Yeah, exactly. Critical assessment of Ugly Kid Joe. Yeah, perfect example. You know what? Fuck those guys. Yeah, that shit sucks. That shit sucks on a level that, like, I'm like, that shit is like Mitt Romney, Ted Lasso meme sucks. Like, that's how, like, what's the worst thing that you could think of? And made all the worse by the fact that it's like adjacent to things that are actually good. Like, that's Ugly Kid Joe. Right. So,
Right.
like, so when
Or
so
like
like
Snow to rap. If anyone
Snow,
remembers that
yeah,
shit.
exactly. Oh god, 30, what is it, 30 inches of snow?
A Canadian rapper who had a faux Jamaican accent.
I mean, but Pete Buttigieg is like the Ugly Kid Joe of the Democratic Party.
Well, that's true.
People,
I mean,
people
fair
are
enough.
like, "Hey, it's great. He's young. He's blah blah." It's like, I'm sorry. Have you fucking like? Are you insane? Have you like looked at like what this dude's all about? Like, it has the trappings of all the things that you like and support, and none of the depth. What up, Jason? They really caused my two favorite white people. That's awesome. That Ugly Kid Joe reference is for you, Miles.
I mean, I was thinking, like, what band's worse than Candlebox? But
you managed to dig a little deeper, but it's good on you for that.
What was I exposed to at 12 that damaged me in some profound way?
Right.
No, it's interesting though, because I started off. I've talked about this before. I started writing about politics by writing about music, which people don't know, because it's also back in the far deep history of the internet, and it's not findable anymore, because no matter what people say about the internet being forever, it's ephemeral as fuck.
Especially these days.
Yeah. Oh my god. I mean, there are essays that I thought were going to be up for years, that were up for like decades, have disappeared in the last like 5 or 6 years. I can't even find them on the Internet Archive, and I'm like, what's happening?
I keep waiting for the day that the Huffington Post totally spikes their old archives, because that's maybe my only like brush with like quote unquote mainstream attention, is like a few articles I did when I was like regularly writing for them, and like that was definitely a case of like, do they know I still have the keys to this house? Like, because I still got the keys to this house. I'm just gonna keep going. Like, I'm gonna keep going until somebody tells me to stop. And then I'll probably still keep going after that. And they finally did, but that was the case with, so a lot of weird shit ended up in Huffington Post. And by weird shit, I mean cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not just talking about myself, but I mean, I got to write an article about like how you shouldn't call them pro-life, they're anti-choice, right? And this is a George Lakoff framing thing, like, and then I got to reference that Bill Hicks bit of like, look, if you're truly pro-life, you go pick at a funeral, not an abortion clinic. But things like that, like, so I think we have a similar path in that way, that like that's kind of how I came into it, because I came into it from like the punk rock, not as a musical style, but as a like an ethos, like right. A set of values and systems that naturally is going to trend both critical thinking but also towards progressive, because you want,
well, I think,
look, Michael Graves, you want me to list off all the fucking conservative punk rockers? Because there's like 5 of them. Right. And like, I get it, but the point of fact is that like there's too many people advocating that side of it as pushing that forth as if that's the prevailing opinion, and it isn't.
What I actually think happened with most punk rockers, if we're honest, is they depoliticized in time.
Exactly. Well, look at, and I think that our buddy Jason talked to him about Green Day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, that's a separate conversation and a valuable one. But my point of fact is that it helped shape my political ethos. The fact that they used to be like MySpace or Friendster or one of these goddamn things, mp3.com, who the fuck knows. I put my my political beliefs were Fugazi and my religious views were Devo. And I felt really good about that, as far as like, in the olden days of like, oh, look at this clever bio I wrote for myself. Isn't this cool? But it's very true. And so the fact that I've had, the fact that I know people from Fugazi through playing music and the show and people from Devo, and I'm able to have this artistic exchange with them and talk to them and talk about their values and what made them who they are, like things that they've dealt with over time, et cetera, et cetera. For me, that puts it all into a context that I think is really, really important beyond liking the music.
That brings me to an interesting period in the 90s and kind of my childhood. I think you're a little bit older than me, but like the origins of nu metal are fascinating to me. And I think this is a study in that tendency of what you said about the gatekeepers to go safer and safer all the time. Even though it was a commercial product with major musicians on it, with major labels, the Judgment Night soundtrack was kind of huge in like taking two arguably semi-marginal pop genres that were very racialized and putting them in direct contact and dialogue with each other in a productive way. And yet over time, instead of getting, in some ways you can argue it led to the direct popularity of bands like Rage Against the Machine, but it also led to the awful nu metal of the early aughts, like directly, undeniably. From you have that to Korn to
right. Right. So two things. First of all, I was born in Modesto, California, the Central Valley, which culturally has more in common with like Kansas than it does with San Francisco or Los Angeles.
I do unfortunately know that.
Yeah. Anyone that knows. From Modesto, like things that are worthwhile that have come out there that you may know of, it's, Lacey and Scott Peterson,
right?
Gary Condit, the murdering congressman. Oh, he's been exonerated now, so I can't say that. The band Grandaddy and George Lucas went to high school there. American Graffiti, and then me, and that's about it. That's like
and some wine.
And some decent wine. I used to spin donuts.
It's not Napa Valley wine, but it's not bad.
Yeah, it's all right. It's you could do worse. And that's I guess that's so the actual slogan is water, wealth, contentment, health, but it should be Modesto. You could do worse. But the two things. So earlier you touched upon the Georgia thing and being like, oh, by the time people cut around to like neutral milk, it's like, fuck, all right, well we're already over that and kind of like maybe coming back to it, but kind of already over that. Like I was very against Pavement for stupid reasons because they were from the next town over, and I was like, my favorite band was Black Flag. What am I gonna say? Like I was like, oh no, that stuff sucks. And then later on, I'm like, fuck, it's really good. God damn it. And I had to realize that
those first three Pavement albums, I'll fight you over.
Well, no, I love them now, but when I was a kid, I was like, no, because it's like I'm getting into like the birthday party. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was like, what is this? But I didn't also live that far from Bakersfield. So like when Korn came out, I'm like, of fucking course they're from Bakersfield. Of course they are. That is the most Bakersfield thing that ever happened. And I also happened to be like making records and touring around the time the new metal came out, where it was like, wow, this is taking all the rage, the righteous indignation and rage from all the things I love and making it directionless and terrible. And it's taking the worst elements of multiple genres and putting them as a melange that I could not have foreseen in my worst possible nightmare. Oh, also, it's the most popular genre now. Wow. Where's my gun? Put it to my head.
You think about it, and it's inarticulate, depoliticized rage that eventually My favorite is when by the time you get to POD and it's like so depoliticized you can hide Christian rock in it.
I know, yeah,
So it's like that's where we're at. And yet there's an
a little
interesting
ringing there.
trajectory when you go back to this kind of groundbreaking moment on a kind of ephemeral. I mean, I guess we should also be honest, in the 90s, movie soundtracks were not ephemeral. They were a major part of the industry. But this experimental movie soundtrack.
They're my Judgment Night now.
Yeah,
Judgment
I am.
Night. I mean,
I mean,
Onyx,
it's such a,
Biohazard, Sir Mix-a-Lot and Mudhoney. I mean, like, there's a lot of like wild ass tracks on that one. Yeah, fuck yeah. Suck about Judgment Night. I'm in. But it was.
yeah.
But the thing is, like, again, culturally, you have to like for the younger listeners, especially. Some of these like aggressive and mad at nothing, or fuck you, mom, which was like what a friend of mine always calls that kind of music, is because they were absolutely terrified, not of Public Enemy necessarily, but of like what happened if an NWA had a Public Enemy swag, right? Where like what if they actually got mad at the right people? So this is like, fuck the police, but like writ large 100 times. And that led to like, well, we need to goddamn do something about this.
I think Rage Against the Machine, even though it was made into a joke, and I think rightfully made into a joke, honestly, by the late 90s, was what they were afraid of. Like you got
exactly. What if we had The Clash, but it was Rage Against the Machine?
Right. You got white suburbanites reading Angela Davis off of the liner notes of a major rock album.
Exactly. Like, which as much as I haven't heard in years, but ostensibly I fuck with the first album. There's a couple good riffs on like the second record. Not really my thing, but respect the hustle and like look, man, that's like 1 or 2 steps away from like some of my favorite shit. Like say what you will about Tom Morello and his fucking cornball ass running around like
his super liberal advocacy later. Yeah,
hanging out in Bill Maher and like whatever. Okay, fine. But basically, dude managed to take like shit that Andy Gill from Gang of Four and Agata from Melt Banana did and turn it into a fucking arena rock style. Get the fuck out of here. Like again, that guy's cornball as hell. But if I, as a guitar player, as a musician, if I ever met that dude, I'd be like, man, respect. Like, and then I would probably drop like 3 references that he'd be like, oh, fuck yeah, that's awesome. Now, granted, now he's all into like Pete Seeger and all that. Okay, fine. Plenty of people doing that, but sure.
I
don't know. What was the question? No, we're talking
about.
No,
it's just, it was just, we were talking about what the industry may have been actually afraid of and why it moved to more aimless. And it was a similar trajectory if we look at what happened with metal to glam metal. If you listen to early metal, like early metal is basically like British and American working class people being very pissed off post Vietnam. Like
absolutely, yeah. Look at Judas Priest, right? Look at like like the class based stuff that was like not like, hey, we're class warriors. It was they were talking about like the world at large. Look at something like Iron Maiden, right? And people like what is it? Singing along to an Iron Maiden song that's literally about colonial expansion and the extermination of Native Americans. And who's playing? The Braves. It's like we live in irony poison times that people don't realize that. But then you have like the more like nihilistic side of things, which I love Slayer, but like Slayer is definitely like what kind of message are they doing? Like, okay,
nothing. I mean, I did see them.
It's not
their trajectory is actually somewhat interesting because I associate them with another band like that, like Jackal.
Jackal with a Y. Yep.
the ending of Jackal for me was in 2005. I'm at this obscure.
It's a harsh joke for you. You pined for the chainsaw, the musical instrument.
No, I'm about to talk about this. I was in an obscure, like kind of music festival in the center of Georgia. And it's like driving and crying and all the Southern rock bands that I hate even more than Six music. And
actually,
then all of a
one of the last shows.
Chainsaw.
That's awesome. So one of the last shows we played pre-COVID was in Austin, and it was one of those places that there's like main venue and there's like a kind of like the outside stage, like whatever. So we were on the outside stage, and in the main stage was Driving and Crying, which I was like,
God.
wow. And like I've been in situations like that over the years. I mean, like Sleater Kinney played the First Avenue and we played 7th Street Entry and we got to like, see it and hang out with him and stuff like that. And that's cool. But I like those moments of just mission because I'm like, when in the name of fuck am I ever going to be interact with a Driving and Crying fan, let alone Driving and Crying, where I'm like, okay, cool. What are these guys about? And not like, I'm not saying I was like a convert or anything along those lines, but I was like, whatever. We're all doing the same shit. You guys are making way more money on it, but it's all right. It's chill. But that has nothing to do with Jackal with a Y and dude playing a chainsaw.
It has everything to do with Jackal with the Y because, because these festivals are where a lot of music comes to be born, but it's also where a lot of it goes to like in its dotage, for lack of a better term.
And talk to Jason about it, but I call it the Festival Industrial Complex.
No. One thing I want to talk about though, I did promise my listeners that we were going to talk about what this is like post-COVID, and we started there.
Oh shit! Yeah, my bad.
But we've been on this weird tangent.
Suddenly, why are they talking about Jackal? I wanted to...
I normally come to this for the Marxism, Varn, not reminiscing about hair metal bands tuning a chainsaw.
What does it have to do with leftist politics again? Yeah.
But yeah. But there was a sense of like different groups of people really meeting in these areas that I think COVID's finished killing, but has been dying for a while.
Yeah. Well, that's the communitarian efforts, right? So I was talking about to the revolutionary tracks guys, to Marcus and Karthik, about like the idea of the benefit comp as the communitarian effort, where you all put in together to work towards a common goal. Perfect example, Conan Neutron, the Secret Friends, our label guy, Rainier Franz, runs this label Learning Curve Records. He had a heart attack and got a heart stint like late last year. And so I put together this compilation for him that was ostensibly a benefit that, full well, it's like, well, it's not this is going to bring in tons of money because it already was a GoFundMe, which like we can talk about like an whole concept of GoFundMes and how those have been naturalized in space of an actual healthcare plan that affects everyone. But it was as much knowing that and this is talking about someone's like a tireless worker for DIY and like underserved bands, bringing them to the world at large, that for him to be able to just see that like, hey, this legitimately cool comp, if I do say so myself, was put together for you because we love you and we want you to feel that love. Well, it also happened that because this happened during COVID times, that like that was the impetus for some bands that basically have been sitting around, with their ostensible dick and their ostensible hands staring at the wall, being like, well, I don't know really what to do right now. Like we can't make a record, should we make records? We can't tour or whatever. That provided value and community effort towards a common goal of helping a dude that is fucking awesome, like almost objectively awesome. And so the compilation, especially the benefit comp as the communitarian effort, I think is undervalued because people, and like, I'm the first one to be like, man, if you got a benefit comp in the San Francisco Bay Area, like I can tell you half the bands are going to be on it. Michael Franti is going to be on one of them. You can have Jello doing something like, and it's like, it's cynical to say that, but we think of the beats of it as like, okay, these are the certain expectations and things along those lines, but genuinely communitarian efforts still happen within music. It's just, it's super niche and it's usually to raise money for shit, frankly, which is fucked up. That's fucked up, right? Like, I mean, Shallow in North Dakota. There's this band Shallow North Dakota, and the one fellow, the drummer, really fucking cool guy, and just had a bad run of health, passed away from cancer, and there's like a benefit comp for him. There's like a benefit quadruple split thing for him, and like, so there's been this outpouring of love from these from different musicians that he's touched within his life, but he didn't get to see that because he fucking died, but his family gets to like feel the love of it and feel this communitarian effort. And the fact that like all these bands that are the different parts of this compilation get to like vibe with each other and be like, wow, we're doing something cool. We're doing it for this guy that like never going to be in Rolling Stone, but whose music touched all of these people. I despise the idea of having to do after someone's like gone, or like, why did it take Rainier having a heart attack for us to like make a cool comp for him and like let him know how. But that's how we've been trained to think now.
Yeah.
Everything's the hot take industrial complex. Not to overuse the industrial complex.
Well, I mean,
but it does build community. Tragedy does build community, right? Think about us getting our dicks kicked into the dirt in 2016, right?
Right.
Has the American left ever gotten a bigger fucking, kick in the pants there? Sorry to overuse the kicking analogies now, but like, no. Because we were like, Christ, we got to build something. We don't build something, we're fucked here. And we're probably still going to be fucked. But
I was about to say we probably are fucked.
We probably still are. And it's not that we and now we just rather tear everything down because it's easier to tear shit down and it feels better.
Right. But, yeah. I mean, the
podcast, whatever.
I mean, the creative destruction part of this thing is getting a lot more weighted on destruction lately. But I do think.
So, and I threw out like 17 things there, but the point of fact is
pick up on this community thing though, because the community bonding over tragedy and marketing is, unfortunately, when I was working in the political publishing industry, is what kept more than one imprint afloat.
Of course, right? Like the like people think of it as like for the hate click thing, right? But like hate clicks were like hate books before. It was like, it's fraught with landmines to talk about Al Franken now, but Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot. like that was great. I mean, that was the equivalent of like a dunking tweet back in the day, except for that was in book form and there were jokes and et cetera, et cetera. And it's not like anything you have is new. It's just the avenues and models for it to hit people differently.
The incentives are there, though. I mean, I'm going to talk about I don't know if you knew Michael Brooks. When Michael Brooks was not
I wish I did.
I know he was a friend of mine.
Yeah, I know. I now know like a half dozen people that were like close to him and in his inner circle. But I will say this, and I'm going to give you an exclusive because I never talked about this. When he died, I only knew him from the work, right? But when he died, I was almost as affected as if like an actual friend had died, because that's how much he had touched me. Because I love podcasts. I love, progressive media, like talk shows or whatever, et cetera, so on and so on. And I've got a lot of nuanced views. They aren't all doctrinaire leftists, et cetera, whatever. But he was such a unique talent with a ability to communicate that I was so deeply affected. I had to I stopped what I do and I was like, I got to go take like a long walk right now because this is fucked up. Like the world lost somebody important. And I don't even know the fucking guy. And I know a bunch of you do, but like, that's how I felt, right? Because I just knew that was like, sometimes you hear something like that and like, like when Mark Linkous of Sparklehorse died. I didn't know Mark.
Oh,
Linkous,
yeah, that was that hit, actually. It was rough in that, I remember having this really heartfelt conversation with Ben and Doug Lane and JG Michaels, all of which JG had introduced me to Michael Brooks. He'd come on my show. We'd met in person a couple of times and became friends. But the kind of horrifying realization that I had when I was talking to Doug, as I looked over to Doug, and I was like, "Is what happened to Mark Fisher is any indication, we're going to make killing off of this."
Yeah.
Because it's gonna drive the community together, and people are gonna buy his book. And unfortunately, his book was not selling very well until he died.
Oh God!
And this is how we're trained.
All right, so I'm gonna do the thing where you say something important and poignant, and I turn it around to me. But trust me, there's a point to it that I was in this band, Household Gods. It was myself, Dave Powell from Slint. LKN, Lauren K. Newman, who was somewhat unheralded except for regionally in Portland, and Vern Rumsey of Unwound. And Vern had done a lot, had done some things since Unwound had split up, but nothing had really hit. And Household Gods was like, like whatever. It's a fucking weird ass, bizarre, Freak Factor 9 like thing nobody knew was happening that existed. Reaching people, touching people, et cetera, et cetera. For Vern, that was great because it had been basically 20 years since anybody gave a flying fuck about what he had done. And we're talking about one of the best bass players in like indie rock, as far as I'm concerned. And believe me, I fucking know. But he died. He died in, it was a year ago, early August. Guess what happened with that record? Sales through the roof. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about like celebrate people when they're fucking here. Because he knew a little bit, because he would get like, whether it's like nice messages from people from like around the world about like, man, I really love the new record. God, this is so great. I hope you guys make another one. Cool. He got to feel that, and it really like bolstered him and helped him. But what is the thing that like made that record sell the most? Somebody fucking dying. The second person out of 4, might I add, because Lauren died actually before the record came out, which is even a bigger tragedy. But I think about this a lot, and not just in terms of like me, but like in terms of like, how can I do a better job of celebrating people while they're here and letting them know I appreciate them? And like that's turned into like weird, like normalized random affirmations kind of thing, where someone's like send like a nice text message to someone and be like, the fuck is this? Okay, cool, thanks, that's awesome, I think you're awesome too. But like there's something in our culture that is rotten and that is dark and is jacked up that makes us only really think about the intrinsic value that someone provides, art or otherwise, to our lives. We don't really appreciate it until they're gone.
Yeah, I'm guilty. I actually was thinking about this because I got the Household Gods album.
Oh, did you? Awesome.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
but because I've been on around, like I used to go see on around when they would come to Georgia. When they go to
one
Atlanta,
of my favorite bands of all time, and one of the reasons I play music. So yeah.
But then I was like, wait, I mean, but I got it because Vern died, and then I'm like, oh wow, Lauren's dead too, and then I'm like. And I didn't even notice the other 2 members in the band, and I'm like, "Oh, I know Conan." Like, I know that guy. I didn't even put it together.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean,
but it proves your point. Like, it's this morbid way in which when this communal stuff comes up, we often don't know how to manifest it except in tragedy. Like,
so going back to the Michael Brooks point, right? Like the thing, something that that I noticed with him was like, wow, I don't want to hear, I'm not going to read a single reply to this because I'm going to say this. Like, I feel like Michael Brooks almost had the Howard Stern thing, that he had ability to communicate that went beyond his peers and connected with people in a certain way that you just don't see that every day.
No, you don't.
And like, I love Sam Cedar. Like, I'm the Sam Cedar of noise rock. I've been doing this for fucking ever, and it's gradually gotten better.
You probably were on Air America at one point.
No. I probably was. Everyone else was, right? But like, in the same way that dude's just been fucking doing the work his entire lifetime, and like it connects with people check in, check out, et cetera, et cetera. But every once in a while you run into someone like Michael where it's like, fuck. And so it's when someone like that goes, like when like a Bill Hicks or Kurt Cobain or whatever, you feel it. And like, look, man, I lost my mom in like late spring, early summer. I lost my bandmate of like 10 fucking years, and like someone I consider more of a brother than my actual brother, in August. Lost Vern the August before that, Lauren the December before that. There's been like basically not more than a 6-month period where I haven't lost someone in my own life. And sometimes some stuff just fucking hits you. Like when David Bowie died, it was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, Bowie. I know this is one of these weird parasocial relationships, and I'm usually the person ranting against them. And of course, I had no relationship to David Bowie except for seeing him live once as a kid when he toured with 9 Inch Nails.
Outsider.
Yeah, which I had to scrape.
I'm Afraid of Americans. Lung, right. By the way, talk about music blogs that don't exist anymore. Lung does an incredible cover of I'm Afraid of Americans. So if you want to hear a awesome latter period David Bowie cover done by a badass band that's cello and drums and badass vocals, go seek out Lung, I'm Afraid of Americans. Also, well too true to this day. Go ahead, David Bowie story.
But and David Bowie wasn't that young, but it was because my now ex-wife was struggling with cancer, and because 2 of my friends had died from drug overdoses, and in the prior year, David Bowie and Leonard Cohen dying back to back was it was this resonance because I associate it with all these other deaths with people who are close to me, and
Yeah.
I think it's.
You
I think
feel it. You feel like
you
you
feel
knew them. You feel like, oh yeah, that's Uncle Leonard. Like we would go hang out at his record and fucking he would talk about Serge Gainsbourg or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you feel like with David Bowie is like, I mean, as someone that is sitting here in a fucking ostentatious looking jacket talking to you on the internet right now, like David Bowie is like the template for like growing and changing and challenging yourself and doing different stuff and not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to be like, oh yeah, remember when I did that record? All right, yeah, that one.
Yeah, we're just not going to talk about Tin Machine.
Yeah, exactly. We don't speak of Tin Machine. Exactly. Yeah, that's great. But yeah. Taking it back to your point, like you feel this affinity to the point of like, wow, that's somebody that was important in my life that I never met.
But it also is interesting. I think there's this dual thing that I don't think that parasocial relationship is bad. I don't want people to think that I think it is. But I do think it's weird how we're trained to view this often in light of these creators and death, and how for a lot of people, for example, if Bowie hadn't released that album right before he died, and it seems like he knew he was dying when he released the album.
Yes.
We would have not talked about him until he was dead.
Right, exactly. So I had Tony Visconti on, which to me is a high point of Protonic Reversal. But he like literally made everyone sign NDAs and stuff. And it's pretty clear from what I know that he knew the end was coming. And he made Black Star. And Black Star is like, I'm like, fucking A, man, that's how to go out. Like, not just make a record, but make a record about the thing that's happening and actually have it be like really kick ass. Please. Yes. But of course it would. Oh, fucking course David Bowie would do that. Would you expect anything else? Because that dude was thoughtful in a way that many people are, but few people are celebrated for.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying he's like a god or anything along those lines. He's a human with flaws like anyone else. And like, whatever, I'm sure a bunch of people want to like drag through it, but like, I'm not about like, saints and sinners. I'm not about like, gods and devils at all, but talk about like, how to live a creative life. Like fucking A.
Yeah. I mean, and actually I think about 2016 as this weird kind of nadir for music because you also get the exact same phenomenon with Leonard Cohen apparently doing 2 albums as he's dying and knows it.
Yeah, and is a frail man. Like
right.
this is not like the Leonard Cohen of, don't go home with your heart on, like, we'll just charitably say like party drugged out, like running around, like, inspiring Nick Cave. And it's like, Suzanne, like young man with a guitar at the Chelsea Hotel either, but owning it and making something that's like, yeah, like you want it darker, be like, oh.
Right. I mean, and then the album that came out that was unreleased from his, like he was recording from his own poems that came out after it was also another gut stab.
Here's some other shit that's gonna fucking blow your mind. Like,
but it is interesting because it's hard to imagine how an artist could have that career now. Like,
it's so okay. You hit on an important point because if it is, it would be something like a Lord situation. Where it's like, yeah, the art's there and the music's there, but they just happen to hit this exact moment in time where the rules were like this, and this, and like, the freaking moon is in the house of Aquarius, whatever the fuck, that like this all transpired, that people were able to, they were given the opportunity to connect with it. They were given something worthy of connection to, and all of the other ancillary elements were not working at discord with it. And that's, well, no one on really likes to hear, but that's like, the Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park chaos theory part of it too. And that is, I will say this, as an artist, when I became more concerned with the journey being the destination, life became a lot easier for me. Where I like doing this, man. I like making records. I like touring. I like writing songs, I like recording songs. Like I love, it's like the Richard Feynman, the physicist, like the pleasure of finding things out. it's be curious. It's like be curious, not judgmental. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was thinking about this the other day because I did this mathematical experiment with my students, and this is an interesting experiment that you can do, where you talk about. Let's assume that 95% of your success is hard work and innovation. All right.
Sure.
Let's then assume that
assumption, but yeah,
it's a totally specious assumption, but it's high for a reason because it still illustrates the point. Yeah. Let's assume 5% of your success is luck, and let's run the math on that. So if we run the math on that, out of 100 chances, you'll have 10 people successful out of 100. Only 2 of them will the decisive factor be hard work and innovation, even if 95% of the reason everyone is famous is hard work. Yep. And since everybody worked hard to get to where they are, they're not going to acknowledge that 8 out of 10 times it was just luck because they have survivor bias. And so, and of course, we all know that me saying 95% being hard work is absurdly high.
Yeah, that's almost objectively untrue. And I say that as other people's words, not mine, as one of the most hard workers that are in my world, right? But hard work itself is part of the puzzle. That gets you to the door. That gets you to the door.
which is, sort of my thing about like capitalist society. Even if you assumed that everybody that this wasn't rigged,
yeah,
all right, it's still mostly luck.
Yeah, I mean
that's assuming it's not rigged.
Absolutely. So, okay, did Alan Thicke's son like have a leg up on other people? Yeah, I would say he did. But also he happened to like come apart a thing that culturally there was some fucking like reptilian need for some sleazy fucking ridiculously misogynistic song that also like ostensibly steals a hook from a much better song, 30 years earlier. And like 40 years earlier, whatever it was. Anyway,
there's a long tradition of that too. But
yeah, and there is a long tradition. Very is there? Huh? Is there a long tradition of white people stealing the music of black people? Huh, all right, let's get
and making it popular after the artist is mostly dead and cannot benefit from it.
but I mean, and I hesitate to even say the guy's name, but like that guy, like having a worldwide *1 hit. I don't think he like all of those factors. The guy, who's his dad? Alan Thicke. Okay, well, guess what? You like were, and I hate to use like the wokeism phrasing, but you were born on third base, basically. And that's one of the worst things about like wokeist discourse, if you will, is the fact that it's all the more depressing because some of it's right.
Yeah, but there are stuff when they're talking about privilege where I'm like, you have a point. You're just over expanding the category.
Yeah, you have a point, but you're just a fucking asshole using it to weaponize something to make yourself feel better and to avoid talking about class often. And again, but by that same token, a lot of creative folks they think it. Some people fall into like first of all, yes, work hard. Right, but hard work alone doesn't get you results. If you enjoy the work, that will make you. Am I a happy person? I don't know. I'm a fulfilled person. What's happy? Happy. Fucking in this economy?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the bull quote, by the way. but like, if you enjoy the journey being the destination, great. So if you get to the destination, awesome. Like I never conceived that like the level to which people have responded to the podcast, Protonic Reversal. I never even, it's like, of course, everyone that starts a podcast thinks that they're going to be, oh, well, I could be the Mark Maron of XXX. Okay, cool. Yeah, whatever. But then you hit the brick wall, of that not being the case, which is much in the same way of like you have the best band in the world and you play to like one drunk dude and the bartender at the bar, and you're like, okay, here's your heaping helping of your own hubris coming back at you. I'm legitimately, I talked about this. I can't remember if this was on a show or not, so I'm just going to repeat myself. Sorry. That I've had a lot of people that now come to me for advice. Hey, I want to start a show. I want to start a podcast. Okay, cool. So, what do you want to know? And like, you always just focus on the content. Do something interesting. Make the show that you want to hear that does not yet exist. And I still say all of that. And I always say, like, by the way, don't do the stuff that I do, because the stuff that I do is like built off of like years and years of like growth. Use the tools that are available to you and do so in a way that is not disadvantageous to the creation of something that is special and cool that does not exist. When people tell you be more like things that already exist, fucking ignore them, because they're wrong. Because very little is created, unless you want to be the Dane Cook of podcasting. Like, very little is created by being a hack, and that's hack work. And I'm a big fan of communitarian effort for creation, much in the same way that like I've had bands over the years that like have come to me for advice on their careers, which like basically do the opposite of what I did. You'll be great. But in all seriousness, like, being like, hey, what should we do with this record contract? I'm like, well, okay, like let's break that down, et cetera, et cetera. And even just more like simple things of just like direction and ethos. It's communitarian effort. So I'm shocked. So it's all right. So I'm shocked by that doesn't happen with the music interview podcast world, which is a bunch of fucking Randian libertarians all fucking rugged individualizing themselves into obscurity. Whereas my foray into this world of like, for lack of a better term, the progressive podcasting sphere, leftist podcasting, et cetera, whatever it is, I'm blown away by the amount of camaraderie and cross-pollination that there is and support for each other. And that's coming as a punk rocker, like as a punk rocker, not in musical genre, but as an ethos. That's huge to me, because that's how you move the needle. You don't move the needle like the idea of there being like, the Captain America or whatever, that's going to, the Superman that's going to like save everything. That's fucking absurd. We all have to be a little bit of Superman all the time. And if we aren't, nothing will change. If we choose to be cynical, and if we choose to go to our darker urges and like just, hey, check out this idiot as our raison d'etre, we're not building anything. And I fucking love tearing shit down. Tearing shit down is awesome, but it takes a lot more effort to build something up. And like what I want to see is I want to see people focus on building, and also don't worry about what's going on over here, man. Run your own race.
Mm-hmm.
Run your own race.
I have seen so many political podcasts actually go down that road, and I actually used to talk about it with Jason, and I would, we would talk about the rat beef model of political podcast creation, and it pays off.
The rat
beef model of political podcast creation.
Yeah, okay.
Except podcasters don't shoot each other that often. I say that when I was actually listening about half the podcasters and leftists that I worked with on the Vampire Castle piece the other day, and I was like, wait, four of those people are dead. Like, so
talking about my musical discography right now, by the way. Hey, let me tell you.
Right. But it is interesting how many people I've seen chase that dragon to try to do even to copy their own success, and totally destroy their credibility, and often usually their brand eventually. And I say credibility and brand separately for a reason, but one does actually eventually affect the other. So it's I tell people, like, if you're going to do a podcast, don't do it as your primary job unless you're already making the money to do it as your primary job.
Exactly. Yeah. I think motherfuckers in 2021 quitting their job to be a band. I'm like, you realize you can't tour, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
You realize
that? Be happy with moderate growth and like figure out why you're doing it other than to be famous for its own sake.
Yeah.
Because right now, let's be honest about fame right now. Like, this is the cheapest fame has ever been.
Oh yeah, dude. This shit is straight pick and save. You kidding me? Like, I mean, like it's yeah. Oh, like I had this dude I've known for like 20 years that was like, hey, congrats on having a successful podcast. And I had to like fight myself to not at least respond in the most cynical way possible of basically being like, yeah, king of the dollar store. You know, like
exactly,
because he meant
success. A successful podcast makes less than minimum wage, guys.
Yeah, like, do you want to know how much this makes on like a hourly basis? Because I've worked it out because I'm a fucking masochist, and like, yeah.
The only thing I actually do that pays less than podcasting is when I take on extra duties as a school teacher. Literally,
right, exactly. Well, and that's the model, and that's where Steve Albini kind of comes in the fact of like your creative ventures shouldn't be what you use to support yourself, so on. And there's an ethos, and I'm not saying that's my ethos, but is a ethos and ethos anyway, whatever. I think that all right. So let's string credulity here and say that Movie Night Extravaganza becomes like the biggest podcast in America, right?
Yeah. It becomes Chapo 2.0, but for movies.
Yeah, sure. But it's about movies this time. By the way, stranger shit has happened, and it is a good enough show for that to happen. So so for me, that would be funny because it wouldn't change what I would do at all. Because it's for a show. It's for a very brilliant brainchild, and he did a thing where he made the movie show that he wanted to hear that didn't exist. That I was like, hey, congratulations, you made the movie show that I wanted to hear that didn't exist too. And the fact that I get to, wander in and interject my bullshit is fantastic for me because I don't have to do any of the other nonsense with it, and I can just add some value. Great. And that's almost like it's like joining someone's band that's already like doing something cool, and you don't have to like book the shows or stuff along those lines. But let's say that like Movie Night Extravaganza became like the biggest show in the world. A lot of times you hear these, and I love hearing about like podcast beef is so astounding. And again, I put that into the explain this to a founding father category of like ridiculous shit. But I mean, I've seen people on like a magnitudes less of what some of the more bigger success stories have been tear themselves apart like wild fucking dogs at the first twinge of success, which was like, is that why you were doing this? Because fucking go be like an investment banker. Like that'll make you some. If you're looking to make money, great. If you're looking to something cool, and if you're looking to do something that's even better, important, that's a different story entirely. If you get rewarded for it, congratulations. You're like that 1% of 1%. That the hard work, the luck, the chaos theory, all that came together, that the fucking lightning bolt hit you. And be cognizant of that. And be altruistic about that. And be of service to people as much as you can. And I don't I consider, like, who the fuck am I? some crazy whack dude with like a goofy name who plays some like relatively uncommercial rock music, although not compared to Jason, frankly. And runs a podcast that's like a big deal for like a small amount of people. Cool. Well, fine. But I enjoy what I do. I love it. Like it's the kind of thing that like the rest of the days where it's like just compounding mediocre misery and life encroaching upon you and like making you feel wanting and needy and terrible all the time. I'm like, oh, right. I got this other thing that I can do that makes all that go away for a little while. And the fact that any of that, any part of it gives anyone some modicum of enjoyment to do the same. It's all right.
Awesome. Well, I think we touched on a bunch of stuff. People should go look up your work over at Protonic Reversal and go listen to the album you can't tour with. Listen to it on Bandcamp.
Yeah, neutronfriends.bandcamp.com.
Listen to it on Bandcamp, so people can make a little bit of change for the work.
Yeah. So support on Bandcamp, whether it's myself or whoever, because it actually more of it goes to the artist than like Spotify or iTunes or any of the rest of that. It's the most artist friendly platform.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, iTunes downloads are.
Yeah, I mean, what do people what is it today? I don't know. Like, and like honestly, it's not
it
about.
Also makes charts impossible to make any sense of now. Actually,
okay, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, like it means nothing. It means less than nothing. Like if people want to listen on Spotify, but I don't. Please, like, just if anyone's listening at all, fantastic. Like, I'm mildly astounded that anybody touches that anything you do in this life affects anyone else at all, especially in the fire hose world that we live in, where it's just everything all the time, always. And it's an honor, by the way, to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
I wasn't quite sure what we were going to talk about, and it's okay because we talked about literally everything. I worked out just fine.
That's kind of what I do. It's a little bit. It's a little bit political, and it's a little bit an interview show where I just let people do what they kind of want to do. And the reason that is, honestly, is you want to talk about Mark Maron for a minute? Our Howard Stern, actually, in his late age.
I like them both, and I especially like the late stage Howard Stern that most people are still unaware of is fantastic, because that shows like, and this is when I get into the cancel culture with no type of atonement. That it's like, yeah, you know what, like throwing the baloney at the woman's rear ends and whatever. Like, yeah, I was never into that, whatever. But like, that's a dude that has done serious work on himself and has managed to actually become better at what he does because of it. But he's also in the freaking walled garden. It's all walled garden shit.
Right. You can't, it's a walled garden that's unfortunately super dying. But I mean, it's interesting because people don't know about this turn. Like, if you compare Don Imus to Howard Stern, and they were roughly comparable in the 80s and 90s. They're opposite trajectories almost. Whereas if you listen to a Stern interview now, it's like a Mark Maron interview, and what he has learned to do is to talk a lot when he needs to talk a lot, and shut up when he needs to shut up, and let people express themselves fairly organically.
Yep.
And I think one of the problems that I've had with a lot of left podcasts as of late is they become very rote. Like, we're on the left book tour, and we got to get this article out for Jacobin, and we're going to have 5 points.
Yeah.
And you know exactly what they're going to be, and nothing interesting comes out of that. So, I mean, and frankly, and as a standpoint of a person who really cares about ideas, don't use that as a substitute for reading their book. Go read their book, and most.
Right. Yeah. By the way, everyone, read all these books. I'm totally talking shit about
right.
No, and I agree. I agree. Yeah.
But all that said, I find it interesting when you just let people go with a broad spectrum of concerns, because stuff comes up that no one foresees, and that's usually the most interesting part of the conversation.
Right. And something so to that, to yes and that point, as they say in improv comedy, something I found with Protonic is like some of the coolest moments happen specifically because it is the kind of conversation that is meant to feel to like you forget there's an audience almost, right? You're talking, you're going deep into it. It's like talking to someone that's like, oh, okay, cool. And then, we're talking about oh man, I've never thought about it, this way or whatever, this and that. And you go down these crazy avenues and streets. And that's what's so cool about the form. And I say that's someone that, like, recently I watched it was one of these cable channels, CNN or something, did a history of late night. Right. And it occurred to me that as much as everyone, lodged Johnny Carson, this and that, he was the only game in town, et cetera, a major label model. But like Dick Cavett, look what he did with his show. He's sitting there having Salvador Dali on. He's having like John Lennon and Yoko come in, and like he was, because he was like, hey, trying to do this establishment stuff doesn't work. So I'm just gonna let's just throw this against the wall and see what sticks. And basically until Letterman, like he was the only one that really had done that. And like that had to have been a lonely place when you were doing it, where everyone's like, hey, it sucks how you're not these more successful versions of the thing that you do.
Right.
And if you listen to people that who give you advice that are basically sum up to, I want you to be more like the things that are the other things in this thing that you do. Ignore
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, because you can't do that, or you would have already done it.
Yeah,
anyway.
because that's not you. Dick Cavett wasn't Johnny Carson, you know, like Dave Letterman wasn't Johnny Carson. Dave Letterman wasn't Jay Leno. Like, and go to Chris Gethard, who's I think the only one that's pushed the fucking needle forward in talk shows in a long time, unless you talk about absurdist shit. Don't try to do something that's already been done. That way lies Candlebox. That way lies Ugly Kid Joe. You know, like that's hack shit. And I by the way, I have no stake in it. I'll name names of all the quote unquote leftist podcasts that are like, you know, like doing like, oh, what if Chapo Trap House, but this, like, what? Are you fucking kidding me? Stop wasting everybody's time. Like, don't waste don't waste your own time, but don't waste the listener's time, because even if someone engaged with it because it hits the notes, it's like the shitty Rolling Stones cover band at the fucking Roadhouse. Like, it's not the Rolling Stones. Don't fool yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end up on. And thank you for coming on. It's been an honor to have you here too.
Pleasure.
And I'm sure people will see us again, because either Jason or Forrest will pull us back into each other's orbits like black holes. But,
yeah, we'll have some some absurd, awesome sci-fi movie or something to like to deconstruct together, and that'll be great. And I look forward to it. It's always a pleasure. Enjoy the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Have a great evening. All right. I do have to do a little Patreon nod. One of the things about the busker economy is keeping your end of the deal. So I'm going to give my new shout outs for those who are people who are supporting me and sponsoring specific shows. So let me do that real fast. There's 2 new of you. Ivan Ivanovich, my Russian friend, who has become a Khan E. Kahanen, and let's see, the aforementioned but unknown last name Patrick, who has become a Khan Il Kahanen. Thank you for your support, and because of stuff like this, hopefully there's more of this in the future, including also more of Nailing It Down. And with that, I'm going to let you guys have a good rest of your evening. And I hope at least you found some cool music to listen to and a new way to approach it. Have a good rest of your day.